In the long and turbulent history of Harlem's drug trade, certain names became headlines. Men like Frank Lucas, Nicky Barnes, and later the figures connected to the crack era were widely known, prosecuted, and turned into characters in films and documentaries. Yet among people who actually lived through Harlem in the 1970s and 1980s, another name circulated quietly in conversations on street corners and inside apartment buildings: Richard Fritz Simmons. Unlike many of the famous kingpins of his time, Fritz existed almost entirely outside official records. He was rarely mentioned in police reports, never publicly arrested, and left behind only fragments of his story told through interviews, memoirs, and community memory. Those fragments, however, describe a man who may have been one of the most powerful and mysterious suppliers in Harlem during the height of the cocaine era. Richard Simmons eventually became known simply as Fritz, and he grew up during a period when Harlem was undergoing enormous social and economic change. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, the neighborhood faced deep poverty, unemployment, and declining investment. Entire blocks were struggling, and the legitimate economy had begun collapsing for many working-class residents. Into that vacuum grew a parallel underground economy built on heroin and later cocaine. For young men living in Harlem during that era, the drug trade was often seen not simply as crime, but as one of the few paths to money and influence. Simmons's family eventually settled on West 112th Street in Harlem, where he would spend much of his life. The building where he lived became legendary in local lore because it reportedly doubled as the center of his operations years later. Despite the power he would eventually accumulate, he remained deeply tied to that same building and neighborhood. People who knew him would later recall that even when he became wealthy, he refused to leave Harlem or move to a suburban mansion, like many other dealers did. Instead, he continued living among the same neighbors who had watched him grow up. His introduction to the drug world reportedly came through a woman known in the neighborhood as Queen Bee, a nurse who had become involved in drug distribution. According to accounts from people who knew them both, she lived in the same building as Fritz and initially supplied him with heroin, giving him his first entry into the business. At that stage, Simmons was not yet a kingpin. He was a young dealer learning the rules of the underground economy, but he showed a rare instinct for strategy and discipline. While many hustlers drew attention to themselves through flashy clothing, expensive cars, and public displays of wealth, Fritz adopted the opposite approach. The less people knew about him, the safer he was. Within a relatively short time, he was moving large quantities of heroin and reportedly earning extraordinary sums of money for someone his age. Some accounts suggest he was making as much as $60,000 a week during his early rise, a staggering amount in Harlem during the 1970s. Yet even as his income increased, his lifestyle remained understated. Instead of flaunting wealth, he continued living in his modest apartment and avoided drawing attention. That discipline would later become one of the defining characteristics of his career. The drug trade, however, was never stable. Rivalries and conflicts were common, and at one point Simmons was seriously injured in a violent dispute. According to stories shared by people close to him, he was shot multiple times during an argument over a bad batch of drugs supplied by a partner. Surviving such an attack might have ended the career of another dealer, but for Fritz it became a turning point. While recovering, he reportedly began building new connections that would eventually reshape his entire operation. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, cocaine began replacing heroin as the dominant drug in many American cities. At the same time, Colombian trafficking organizations, particularly those connected to the Medellin cartel, were expanding their distribution networks into the United States. Simmons was among the Harlem figures who recognized this shift early. Through intermediaries, including individuals connected to organized crime networks, he reportedly developed relationships that allowed him to access cocaine directly from high-level suppliers. Those connections transformed him from a neighborhood dealer into something much larger, a supplier. Instead of controlling individual corners or street crews, Simmons moved into wholesale distribution. He supplied large quantities of cocaine to trusted dealers throughout Harlem and other parts of New York City. In doing so, he created a business model that was unusual for the time. Rather than employing large crews or running visible drug houses, he worked with a very small circle of associates and relied heavily on a system of consignment. Under this system, Simmons would give trusted dealers large quantities of cocaine up front, allowing them to sell it before paying him back. This approach required enormous trust and careful judgment about who could handle such responsibility. But for those who knew him, that was precisely Fritz's strength. He had an uncanny ability to identify which dealers were reliable and which were reckless. Because he kept his circle small and avoided violence whenever possible, he managed to operate in the background, while others fought public turf wars. His success earned him a reputation among Harlem dealers as the Consignment King. At one point, he reportedly moved 15 kilograms of cocaine in just 2 weeks, an extraordinary amount for that period. Despite the millions of dollars passing through his hands, Simmons remained surprisingly frugal. While other traffickers drove luxury cars and wore designer clothing, Fritz drove a modest Nissan Maxima and dressed in ordinary work clothes. His reasoning was simple: attention was dangerous. The more visible someone became, the easier it was for law enforcement or rivals to target them. At the same time, he built strong loyalty within his neighborhood. Residents of West 112th Street often remembered him not only as a dealer, but also as someone who quietly helped people in need. Stories circulated about him paying rent for struggling neighbors, buying groceries for elderly residents, and purchasing school clothes for children in the building. Whether those acts were motivated by generosity or by a desire to maintain community support is difficult to know, but they created a powerful sense of protection around him. Through the 1980s, Simmons' influence expanded. According to accounts from people in Harlem's drug scene, he supplied cocaine to many of the neighborhood's most prominent dealers. Because he stayed behind the scenes rather than controlling visible street crews, his name rarely appeared in public conflicts. Yet insiders understood that much of the cocaine circulating in Harlem could be traced back to him. One of the most famous episodes involving Simmons occurred during the tragedy surrounding Richard "Rich" Porter, a major Harlem dealer whose life later inspired parts of the film Paid in Full. In December 1989, Porter's younger brother Donald was kidnapped and held for a ransom of $500,000. Desperate to save his brother, Porter turned to various associates for help raising the money. Among them was Fritz Simmons. According to several accounts, Simmons responded by giving Porter 30 kilograms of cocaine free of charge so that he could sell it and generate the ransom money. It was an extraordinary gesture, representing millions of dollars in potential profit. Unfortunately, the plan failed. Donald Porter was murdered before the ransom could be paid, turning the event into one of the most tragic stories in Harlem's drug history. Through all of this, Simmons remained remarkably invisible to law enforcement. Many other traffickers of the era were arrested during massive federal crackdowns on drug networks, but Fritz never faced the same fate. His low-profile lifestyle, limited crew, and reliance on trusted associates made him extremely difficult to investigate. Some observers later compared him to the fictional character Kaiser Soze, a powerful figure whose existence was widely known but rarely documented. Yet the end of his story came not through arrest or violence, but through illness. In the early 1990s, rumors began circulating that Fritz had become seriously sick. Different explanations emerged over time, and the truth has never been fully confirmed. One account, reported by former Harlem hustler Azie Faison, claimed that Simmons contracted HIV from a contaminated blood transfusion while receiving medical treatment after a gunshot wound. According to this version of events, the infection slowly weakened him until his death in 1991. Other people close to him have suggested different possibilities. Some believed he may have been poisoned, though no evidence has ever been publicly produced to support that claim. Because Simmons avoided law enforcement attention throughout his life, there were few official records documenting the circumstances of his illness or death. As a result, the exact cause remains uncertain. What is known is that by 1991, Richard "Fritz" Simmons was gone. His death received little public attention compared to other figures of the era. There were no major criminal investigations, no widely reported funeral coverage, and no official case files explaining the end of his life. Yet within Harlem, his absence was deeply felt. For many people who had known him, he had been more than just a supplier. He had been a quiet presence in the community, someone who had grown up among them and never abandoned the neighborhood even after becoming wealthy. Over time, his story faded into legend. New generations of dealers rose and fell. Some were arrested, others killed. But Simmons remained different. He had built a powerful cocaine distribution network, supplied some of the most famous dealers of the era, earned millions of dollars, and somehow avoided prison entirely. In a city filled with notorious crime figures, Richard Fritz Simmons remains one of the most enigmatic. There are few photographs of him, almost no official documents, and no recorded interviews. What survives are the stories told by people who lived on the same streets and saw him sitting quietly on the stoop of his building, looking like an ordinary neighbor while controlling an empire that stretched far beyond Harlem. Decades later, his life still raises the same question. How did one of the most powerful suppliers in New York's drug history remain almost invisible? For many who knew him, the answer was simple. Fritz Simmons understood something most criminals never learn. The most powerful man in the room is often the one no one notices.